So, yeah, it occurred to me that a couple of things weren't included in that video that I gave you that was from a previously recorded class. Um, I never went over how, or at least I don't think I did, how to sepia tone or cool tone a photograph. And I never went over how to actually, like save your photograph in, whichever format that you may desire. So anyway, here's this photograph that I have been working on. I have it edited to the way that I like it. Oh, by the way, I also want to kind of show you this. On my desktop, you'll see I have this folder right here. Now, you don't have to do this. You may have, you may already have a method you prefer to use for organizing your photographs when you edit, and that's perfectly fine. I often require the students in the classroom to do what I'm about to do here. And for me, this system works, but by all means, you do what you like. But in this folder that I have here, that's just called photography, you'll see I've got folders for separate assignments here. I'm not sure if you'll have 4 assignments now or not. I'm trying to decide exactly whether I'll combine some assignments or what I'll do, but you'll know what's happening on that soon enough. But anyway, within the folder here, you see I have a folder called camera images, and that's where I have put the images that came from my camera. you know, and I have one here called black and white, and that's where I will save images after I have edited them. Um, because I don't want to just overwrite the original image, because then I have to hope it's still on my SD card in the camera, uh, because it will have been overwritten by a black and white photograph, and I won't be able to then do anything about that. On top of that, right, I'm asking for you to make 5 of these. So you need to be able to export each one separately, right? So I'll talk about that as well as the cool and warm toning here in this video. All right, so pull this back up. All right, so I've got my photo edited the way that I would like it. What we're going to do here is mimic the look of the old warm tone and sepia tone paper. If you've never used either one in the darkroom, um, they were really cool. It was something that I enjoyed doing. Um, I'm looking around my studio. Yeah, it's a little hard to get to, but I still have an old box. Man, that thing's probably a good 8 or 9 years old. A box of warm tone paper that's over there. It's behind some stuff, so I don't want to try to get to it right now. I don't think I have any cool tone paper in this anymore. I think I may have used it all up. I really liked that stuff, but the warm tone paper, when you put it through the chemicals, it would come out just ever so slightly warm, right? And then you'd put it through this additional set of chemicals. The way I used to describe it to students so that they'd be prepared for it before we went into the dark room and worked with this stuff is that the chemicals you'd put it through for a second time. You put the paper after it had already been developed through these chemicals. Sort of smelled like someone had like farted in the room maybe like 3 minutes ago and had left, and now you have walked into it. It was kind of that smell. It was almost a rotten egg kind of smell. But when you put them through those chemicals, man, they get this beautiful, like all of your blacks and your dark grays would get this beautiful kind of chocolatey brown kind of color to them. And then the cool tone had your darkest dark, what would be a pure black in a regular like sulfur gelatin photograph, uh, would be kind of almost a dark purpley blue. And then it sort of went through blues and cyan kind of colors as you went down through the grays. And then the paper itself kind of had a creamy, color to it. It wasn't pure white. It was almost like a cream color. And we'll mimic all of those things here. Let me start with warm toning, right? For both of these, what we're going to use is up here toward the top. You'll see all these different drop downs that we can click on. There's one here called colors. We're going to deal with color balance. Right? Now in color balance, what you'll see here is the ability to select what's going to be affected by what we're going to do in this dialogue. Either the shadows, the midtones, or the highlights of your image. And then why these colors are directly across from each other on each of these sliders will be something that we'll talk about more in depth next week as we talk about editing our photographs in color. But just understand that these two colors, as far as digital color goes, are opposites of each other. Right? And so what this allows us to do is to choose our shadows, our midtones, or our highlights, and then key those highlights, midtones, or shadows toward these one or the other of these colors on each of these sliders. Right, so my highlights here are what I have selected. Sorry, my phone just buzzed. Maybe I'll go with my midtones. There are a lot of midtones in this. All right, if I wanted to say shift these toward yellow. Now I'm going extreme with it, right? I'm pushing it all the way over here so that all my midtones are turning super yellow. I guess I have more highlights in here than I realized. Let's say I wanted to push my highlights towards red, right? And maybe my shadows toward green, right? Making for a pretty psychedelic looking image here. Now we don't want to do anything that's nearly this out there, right? We're not going this extreme. Let me reset this. That's what this button is here. If you ever end up doing something you don't like, just hit reset. I have my image back to black and white. Granted, while I'm doing this, none of this is actually happening to the photograph until I hit OK. I'm just seeing a preview as is indicated by this X right here. Right, so if I do some crazy stuff again, right, if I click off of the preview, you see the black and white image is still there. All right, so reset that again. So get my highlights. For a sepia or warm toned image, first things first, we're going to take our highlights. And again, I mentioned that the cool tone paper is kind of creamy in color. So is the warm tone. So what we're going to do is we're take our highlights and we're going to bump them toward yellow, right? You can either slide this like I was doing a moment ago, or you can right here click on this and type this in. I'm going to go, and I'd make a note of this if I were in your shoes, -20 toward yellow, right? If I click off and back on, you see that what that's doing is just kind of taking my highlights and pushing them a bit more yellowy, giving it kind of a creamy look to it. All right, then I'm going to take my midtones. And again, I'd make a note of this. Just kind of make a note of the numbers and which sliders you need for each of these. And we're going to want to push these midtones a little toward red and a little toward green. Right? I usually start off at about 10 toward red. And, let me turn the preview back on. And maybe about 5 toward green. And then I kind of look at this and think, is it doing what I want it to do? Right? If I turn this off and then back on. Right? I'm looking at that and I think it could go maybe just a little warmer. So maybe I'll do 15 toward red. And yeah, I think I'll leave it at 5 toward green. All right. What I'm looking for is a warmer gray. Right, let me kind of zoom in. All right, so the difference between that and this, it's slight. And I don't know what you're watching this on. Maybe the difference isn't super pronounced on what you're watching this on. But I think you'll certainly see the difference when we actually work with shadows. All right, so in our shadows, then, We want to also push these toward red, and then maybe even just maybe slightly toward green. We don't want to go too crazy toward green. All right, so I'm going to try 10 toward red again. That's kind of where I like to start. That's getting there. Maybe I'll go 15 toward red. And maybe even 20 toward red. Yeah. All right. And then I don't want to go crazy with the green. I might just go like 2 or 3. Just understand this green is taking that red and neutralizing it a bit. It's making it a little more orangey. And if you think about orange and black, if you were to mix those two, you'd get brown. So that's kind of what we're doing here. All right. Yeah, I like it. All right, so here's our warm toned image. Right. If I have, in my case, I have my undo window open over here. If I go back to the step just before, there's my image as it was in black and white. And now here's my warm toned image, right? That sepia / warm toning gives a feeling of being kind of old timey, right? Because a lot of the old silver gelatin photographs early on in the history of photography kind of had a sepia color to them. It also just, there's that warmth. So, depending on the mood that you're trying to communicate through a photograph, that warmth could suggest certain things. What I'm saying is there are reasons that one might choose to play around and mimic this old look. All right, if I go back, so I'm getting rid of that, right? I'm not. Well, you know what? Actually, first, let me show you how we would save this. So let's say this is one of my versions that I would like to have for my assignment. If I were in your shoes, then I'm going to go up here to File, and you'll see here there's an option to overwrite that image that I'm working with, the one that I have open currently. I don't want to do that. I'll come down here to Export As. And understand, let me hang on. Let me show you something. There's also these options up here that say save and save as. You're not wanting to do that. At least, no, there's not really much of a reason to with what we're doing. What saving will do is not save an image. It will save a GIMP file, right? It'll only be a file that GIMP can open. This is more important in situations like if you were to take the computer art class that I offer, where you might be building up an image with lots and lots of layers on top of each other, and you want to save a file that has all those layers that you can move around separately. Because once you export that as an image, the image gets flattened, and there aren't all of those. It just gets compressed down to a flat image without all those separate layers. In our case, in here, if you want to save a GIMP file, fine, but you certainly don't have to. There's no reason to. Right? In our case, we want to export the image. Right? You'll get this dialog here. I'm going to choose within my assignment 1 folder, that black and white folder. And then I'm going to title this, let's say Ocean. And if I were doing this for the assignment, I'd want to number these perhaps so I can keep them in, so I can know I've got 5 of them. So maybe I'll say Ocean 01. And then you want to put a file suffix at the end of this, whatever the file of your choice is. Now, for the purposes of submitting your work to me, a JPEG is fine. There's no need for you to go for a PNG or a TIFF or something like that, because you're going to upload this in Google Classroom. You don't want to be sitting and waiting forever on upload times. So JPEG's perfectly fine, right? But when I told you in our conversation on Google Classroom the other day that GIMP will export in whatever file format you would like, this is what I'm talking about. You can type whatever back here. The GIMP supports so many file types. I have yet to find one, honestly, that GIMP can't recognize. Even the I talked about in that lecture, the WebP that Google is pushing. Uh, GIMP can open WebP even. Like it seems to be able to open just about any and export to just about any file type. So, but JPEG's fine for our purposes, right? So I'll export that. Uh, the percentage of the quality is just that's going to affect file size, right? Uh, I usually go for about 95 just to get my file size where it looks really good, but it's not too gigantic. And I'll click to export it. And so now if I go into that folder, there's my image. Right? And it is sepia toned. Right? Now, something I often find happens with students when they're working with these then on their own is they'll take those numbers I just gave you and they'll go just way too wild with them. Right? And so I'll end up getting these images sometimes. If I go to my color balance, that end up looking just way too crazy. Like students will go way too saturated with the colors. That's not what we're aiming for with these, right? We want a subtleness to it. All right, so let me go back to just my black and white image. And if I want to cool tone this image, I'll go to my colors and my color balance again. And this time, what we're going to do with the highlights, we're going to do exactly what we did with the last one. We're going to go -20 on the highlights. That's going to give us a much more creamy color as sort of the basis of everything. Then we're going to go to our shadows. This is how I like to do it. I like to get my shadows right on cool tone and then figure out how the color in the middle should work. And understand, I'm giving you some guidelines. I'm telling you where I usually start to try to get the color that I'm looking for. But each photograph can be very different. And so sometimes these need little adjustments. So like you saw earlier with the warm tone, I started with 10 on red and then gave it little bumps to see if I could get the color looking the way that I would like it to do. That's what I'm going to do here. I'm going to start with my shadows, but instead of with red, I'm going to work with blue, and I'm going to push it 10 to start off with. That's getting there, but I think I could go a little further, so maybe like 15. And what I'm looking for is just kind of a bluish gray. I'm going to also push this a little toward magenta because the blue of cool tone is kind of purpley gray. Or purpley blue, rather. Let me give this a bump toward magenta. So if I go like maybe 1, 2, 3, 4 toward magenta, or -4 toward magenta. It's looking pretty good. Maybe I'll give this just a bit more of a nudge toward blue. I think I went too far. Maybe there. Right? I want a subtle purpley blue gray. Right? The way I've kind of just tried to describe it before is if you ever had one of those cheapo ballpoint pens that's like a really dark blue, and when you draw with it, that blue is almost purple, but then almost black as well, like that color, that's kind of what you're aiming for. All right. And so the midtones then are going to be a bit more cyan. because they're somewhere between that purpley blue and yellow. And cyan is this color that's well, here, I'll take my midtones and push it towards cyan so you can see, right? It's this almost electric bluish green, which is a perfect medium between that dark purpley blue that we've made the shadows and the creamy color of the paper. By the way, you don't always have to hit reset down here. If what you're needing to do is just reset the particular range that you're working on, you can just hit reset range and it goes away. I'm going to say maybe -10 towards cyan. Let's see how that does. Maybe -20 towards cyan. No, that's too much. I've gone too far. Maybe -17. Okay, yeah. And then I'll usually also bump it ever so slightly toward magenta. Not much, because it's just to kind of neutralize it just a wee bit. Okay. Now, this -17 towards cyan in some images might be too much. I think I'm flirting with it being too much now. Maybe I'll take it down to 16. Whoops. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. All right. And hopefully this, whatever device you're watching this video, hopefully those changes are noticeable. If I sort of zoom into an area here, right? Look at the difference between this versus that. You see these blues in here. You see the more yellowy colors in the lighter areas, right? And you see that kind of cyan color that's happening in our grays. Right? That mimics what the cool tone paper does. These things still exist. As I said, I've still got a package of warm tone paper over there. All right. So then, if I were working on this assignment, this could then be number 2. So I could export this as Ocean 02. I'm already in my black and white folder because it's the last folder I opened. So, okay, export that. Yeah, I'll keep it at 95. All right. Then this image here, as I had it here, I could export as. Right. Now, again, notice I didn't click on export to Ocean 02. Right. I went to export as so that I can change the name. I'll make this Ocean 3. Export that. And you know what? Let's take this all the way back to when I desaturated it. And I could, this is my undo history. I'll go into my levels again. And maybe I want to, because I've asked you to really play around and experiment. So maybe I want to make this look completely different from that image that I just had. That image I just had, I felt was the perfect one. Maybe this time around, I want to, I don't know, really crank this gray down here and bump this black up a bit. Give myself an image. Oof, that might be too much. Give myself an image that's much lighter, but still has some contrast because of these dark areas that are in it. Yeah, okay. And now, because I can't remember if I spoke, I think in that video I might have had to rush at the end to talk about burning and dodging. So let me talk about that just very briefly. So let's say right now, because of what I've been doing here, that shoulder is just a little too gray for me. I'd rather it be darker like the rest of the shirt is here. So what I'll do is I'll get my burning and dodging tool right here. I will come down here and tell it to burn midtones. And wow, that's a big brush. So let's go back up here. So the brush The brush is the shape that will be affected. And you really do want one of these fuzzy circles right here when you're burning and dodging. You don't want anything sharp edged because you want the edges to blend. So I'm going to grab this one right here, and I'm going to bring my circle way down. Nah, still not. Okay, all right. And oh, by the way, I'm zooming in and out because I have a mouse by holding down Control on my keyboard and using the scroll wheel in the middle of my mouse. But you know, here's the way to zoom in and out. Otherwise, is this zoom tool. Clicking on it to zoom. If I hold Control and click, I can zoom out. Right. Get my burning and dodging back. All right. Zoom in here. And I just want to burn the midtones. Yeah. And it looks like perhaps that's more shadow than midtone. Let's burn shadows. Yeah. Now, you may also see down here that I have my exposure set to 48.1. I think I meant to have it at 50, and it's just that's where I stopped. All right, if I wanted the effect to be much more pronounced, I would crank it up. If I wanted the effect to be lessened, I'd crank that exposure down. All right. And so again, I hope this shows up on your whatever device you're watching this on. On my computer screen, his shoulder got a little too bright for me. It looked like that. Again, hopefully that's showing up on whatever device you're watching on. And now it looks like that. And when I zoom out, for me, that makes more sense. I like that better. Right? I get a good clean silhouette there, as opposed to this lighter gray. Well, I mean, it's still a dark gray, but a lighter. It's lighter than that black. All right. So then I could go to File, Export As, and I could make this Ocean 04. I go in here. At this point, I have 4 versions of this image. Right? So that's that. Right? Warm toning, cool toning your images, burning and dodging, and exporting your images. That's sort of those are like the final steps that were needed to really explain what I think I may have missed in the earlier part and what you really need in order to do this assignment. So my apologies for not having that included. As you can tell, this is newly recorded. I'm in my studio at home. Much of what you'll receive from me the rest of this month will be recorded here. All right. Okay. All right. Please, again, by all means, let me know if you've got any questions about anything. All right. Also, if you want to show me any of what you're doing, what you've been shooting between now and when it's actually due on Sunday, that's perfectly fine as well. Also, Sunday night at noon is just when, wow. Sunday night at midnight is just when the work is actually due. Like it's due by then. You can turn it in at any point between now and then. If you do turn it in before midnight on Sunday, which again is perfectly fine, but if you do that, send me an email or something to let me know that you've turned it in. For whatever reason, Google Classroom doesn't let you know that an assignment has been submitted unless it's been submitted late. It's an annoying thing that really bugs me. Google Classroom, man. Anyway, yeah. Let me know if you've got questions at all. See you. I'll see you later. I'll see you whenever the next lesson may be. All right. Bye.